Hello everybody, I'm Anaji and this is FMV Reviews. Now you might notice things look a little bit different because you can see me. I thought since I was starting this new YouTube channel that I would sort of switch up the format a little bit and show a little bit more of myself. So here I am, but it'll still be the same old good FMV reviews for the fans that I have out there. Okay, so today's movie is going to be One Night in Miami. So originally when I saw the trailer for this, I definitely was curious. I didn't know really anything about the movie, but the premise got me interested. And the premise is basically you have it where there's this event that is supposedly supposed to have happened where four very big historical black figures in the 60s all spent a night together. Now, no one really knows what happened in it, but people have speculated and there was a play written about it. And so the four historical black figures that are in this are Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke. You don't really need to necessarily know anything about them to have the movie work for you. It definitely helps if you have more of a context, because this biopic definitely does something that I've been wanting movies about real historical people to do, which is to not try to tell someone's whole life story, but to rather pick a moment in their life and focusing on that. I just find a lot of times, I think because biopics are trying to span so many decades of someone's life, that they all kind of have to hit this sort of samey formula, and luckily this movie avoids that. So if you see me looking down, all it is that I have my notes right here, so don't worry, there's nothing wrong. So first of all, I like bottle films. Okay, I even like TV shows that do it, where basically you have it where the characters are stuck in maybe one or two sets with each other. There's not a lot of cutting away to different things. It's not a lot of big action things. It's mainly just characters, dialogue, and direction, which is why I think bottle films to me are a real test of a lot of different things in the filmmaking craft, of directing, the screenwriting, the acting, because you don't have other things to really pull attention or to keep attention. That's all you really have. But if you're doing it right, that's all you really need. Like, let's be real. Most of Quentin Tarantino's career is just scenes like that, right? It's just a bunch of people talking to each other, but it's done so well and it's so riveting that it's just as compelling as an action scene. And I can definitely say that this movie pulls that off. I think because I did have a little bit of a background of these historical figures, it informed them in a certain way that I do wonder if someone who didn't know stuff about them, how they would feel about it. But it definitely made it where I was very excited to see, man, what would these different historical figures, what would their banter be like, and what would they talk about, especially in a time such as the 60s, which had a lot of civil unrest, especially for black folks. That's when the civil rights movement happened. So yeah, I definitely did like that. I also like the fact that the film depicts 60s culture, which is pretty well worn in terms of pop culture, right? Like, I think in the 90s they went through a lot of 60s nostalgia. We're getting, there's like nostalgic cycles that culture goes through, and I definitely think the 60s kind of pop back up a little bit in the 90s and whatnot, but we tend to only really see a certain side of it, which, to be real, is it's very white side. You know what I mean? Not to say it's anything bad. It's still very hip. It's still very cool. But in this movie, they depict the black experience of the 60s, which I never really realized that I didn't know much about it until the movie started showing me stuff like the fashion, the cars, what were they talking about, and all that. And I thought that was really interesting. I definitely think for Hollywood to stay interesting and to be more inclusive, it doesn't even necessarily mean you need to make crazy different kind of movies, right? Like just the fact, just to have it where you maybe are focusing in on a certain period of time, but maybe from a different culture's identities lens through that can add interest to a genre that maybe, because we've only ever gotten like the white side of it, we've kind of worn through it because we've had decades and decades of seeing that similar stuff, while just injecting a new lens on it can give it more power and make it where it feels more novel. So I definitely enjoyed the fact that this movie did that. The cast in this movie is really, really good. Really good. Most of them are unknowns. I don't know most of them, but there were two in particular who really stood out to me. One was Kingsley Ben-Adir. I've never seen this guy, but he plays Malcolm X, and man, he is so good in this movie. He's so captivating, and to be real, because of his depiction, I actually became very interested to learn more about Malcolm X, because I realized I don't really know that much about him. History does not really talk about him much in terms of American culture, like social studies. They don't really talk about Malcolm. They only really talk about Martin. And the other actor I thought was really good in this too was this guy named Eli Gorey. The only other time I've seen this guy was in Glow, which unfortunately that show is canceled. I know that sucks, but his depiction of Muhammad Ali. Now, Muhammad Ali is a character that, like, a person that I'm a little bit more familiar with. My dad's a big boxing fan, but man, did this guy capture Muhammad Ali, but also found ways to like add shades to him. Because, you know, I think a lot of times when people think about Muhammad Ali, they think about the very boisterous, very charismatic, trash talking, swagger of Muhammad Ali. But this movie finds a way to have it where this actor's pulling that off, but they're also adding shades and nuances, because the age that Muhammad Ali in this movie is 22. And now that I'm definitely older than that age now, yeah, when you're that age, you're still trying to find yourself. Even someone like a Muhammad Ali, he was still trying to find himself, you know, and you could see why that in this point in his life in this movie, he was definitely at a bit of a crossroads. And I think that's a very interesting place to focus in on these particular historical figures. Also, I have to say, Regina King directed this. And man, Regina King's been an actress who's been around for a really long time. And I've liked her in a lot of stuff, most recently in Watchmen as the main character in that, man. And that show was crazy good. But Regina King has shown that all those years being in front of the camera has translated to her having a lot of skills behind the camera, right? Like, this movie's kind of a bunch of different genres mixed into one, just because of the various historical figures and their various backgrounds. You have it where she's having to do musical sections because of Sam Cooke's inclusion. You have it where there's drama and a sports boxing movie kind of wrapped all in one. And she pulls them off pretty effortlessly. I mean, I'm not gonna say the cinematography is like super showy or anything, but for someone, I think this is her first directorial debut in terms of a film. I think, to be real, she might be a director that we need to watch out for, because, I mean, this is already a strong debut. I can only imagine with time that she's just going to get even better. So Regina King, amazing job, really amazing job. I love the dramatization of this event that they picked. I'd never really heard of this event until the movie is about to come out. But I just think it is an interesting thing that we're kind of seeing happen in movies. Not to say it didn't happen before, but sort of, instead of trying to tell like a super faithful depiction of someone's life, you kind of pick a moment and go, I'm going to dramatize this and see what I can get out of this in terms of themes and using historical figures, because we do have a certain idea of certain historical figures in our head when they're so big in pop culture, right? Like, we have certain, like, if you think of a Bruce Lee, you know, if there's certain characteristics and traits that we've attributed to him, that if you pull on those, it instantly makes us think of him. And it's interesting to see that with various other historical figures as well in this film. I also want to say Kemp Powers. I've never really heard of this guy before. He's the guy who wrote this play, and I think he helped write the screenplay as well. You know, I only recently heard of him because he helped them do Soul, which for Pixar, that was a pretty good film and a pretty good use of like having black people in an animated film, but not having it where the movie focuses on their race. And Kemp Powers is part of the reason that's happening. So once I'd seen Soul and then I knew this movie was coming out, I became more excited because I went, oh, this guy does pretty good work. And man, he does. I mean, because for the most part, this is based on a play. And a lot of times in films, you can tell when they're based on a play because they'll be very, in stage plays, they only have one set for the most part. So you're not going to have a lot of crazy set changes or like crazy action scenes for the most part, because that's not really what plays are about. They're more about drama and character and acting. And this script makes it where, because you have all these various historical figures in a room together, you have where they're talking about race, They're talking about identity. They're talking about religion. They're even talking about philosophy. And what's crazy about it is the fact that what these people were talking about in that period of time, the civil rights movement, almost 60, 70 years later, we are still having discussions about the things that some of these people, actually most of these historical figures depicted in this, were fighting for, which was racial equality, right? Like, especially in this period of time, we're still having to have those same discussions. So I definitely think this movie coming out in this time makes it where there's a certain potency to it because it's still very relevant. I would actually love to see this on stage. I mean, I know because of that will not be named, but that has stopped the world, that it may be a while before we have that kind of stuff again. But after seeing this film, I would like to see it as a play, because I'm not gonna lie, watching live, watching a live play in person, there's a certain thrill to it, because you realize that there's no cutting, they can't do any double takes or anything like that. Whatever they do, whether they forget their lines or whatever choices they make at that night, that is what's gonna happen. So it adds a certain electricity in the air that I think a screenplay like this would be very riveting to watch. Okay, if I were to say like any sort of little criticisms about the movie, I would say that I do think it is a bit too long. I think the movie's almost about 2 hours. There are definitely moments where the movie kind of drags a little bit, but for the most part, I still enjoyed it. It's just like a little nitpicky thing. I would have liked to see Aldous Hodge as Jim Brown do more. I thought that he looked a lot like Jim Brown. I had to look him up because I've only known Jim Brown when he was older, but man, he looks a lot like that guy, and he does have a presence about him, and I do kind of wish he had got to do more in the movie. Yeah, and I think to end it, I would just say that I am interested in this sort of use of historical figures, almost in the way that we use like pop culture characters or mythical heroes a little bit, where there are certain historical figures that are so prominent in the culture that we know them so well that when you put them in there, they automatically come with certain themes and traits attached to them. I think I kind of had this feeling when I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where with the depiction of Bruce Lee and all these Hollywood figures, of how, yeah, they've almost become like mythical heroes that we talk about in certain ways, and how that's going to be an interesting thing to see film culture use to their advantage. So overall, I think One Night in Miami is a good watch. To me, it's an interesting bottle film. I think it's talking about a lot of culturally relevant stuff that's still cultural now. And with that, I'm going to give One Night in Miami an 8 out of 10. So thank you guys for watching this review. I know it's been a little while, but a lot of transition stuff was happening, and a lot of it was me trying to figure out if I wanted to start a new channel, which if you're watching this, then I did. So hopefully I'll be putting out more of these. If you like it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and to leave a comment down below and let me know if you've seen this movie and what you think about it. And until then, I'll see you guys later. Peace.